Welcome to the Study Table, where you will hear archived content and in-depth interviews with insiders and innovative people working with student athletes. I'm your host, Fred Opie.
And I'm producer, Alex McKay. On today's show, Fred talks to Kathy Ray, a childhood friend and the mother of two current college athletes. Kathy and Fred discuss recruiting, parent-coach relationships, major injuries, and the differences boys and girls face when trying to play sports in college. Now, on to the show.
Kathy, I want to just have you tell us a little bit about the experience of both your two children. First of all, a little bit for the parents who have children that are in high school or even middle school, and what I would say, how do you raise up a champion both academically and athletically? What would you say?
That's probably a lot of different components. Right now I have a son who is a lacrosse player at the Naval Academy. He's a second-year student there, and my daughter just started Lafayette College, where she's a volleyball player. And we knew pretty early on that they enjoyed sports, and that's where they like to put a lot of their time. I've always been a real stickler for grades, so sports couldn't happen unless they met their responsibility academically. But once they did that, we really encouraged them to play all the different kinds of sports they wanted to. And my son settled in on lacrosse and my daughter for volleyball. And we had two different recruiting experiences, both kids, for a number of different reasons. But for us, it's always been academic first, and then sports second. And it's something that it certainly helped these two kids get to where they needed to go.
Well, Kath, let me ask you, if I'm a parent and I have a child who just is not taking studying seriously, trying to get away with not doing homework assignments or just doing enough effort to hand in the assignment but not coming home with great grades, I don't know if you had those experiences. You know, there's all different types of children. There's some children are compliant, or some type A, all strong-willed or powerful kids. Did you have those experiences with either kids, and what kind of strategies did you employ that others may be just waiting to hear? What do I do?
Well, we were pretty lucky with our first two kids. So I have four kids in total. Two are in college, one's in high school, one's in middle school. And our older two kids have been pretty traditional students. They've been able to learn in a traditional way, so they fit into the school system as is. So we were pretty lucky that way. They also had the opportunity. They both went to single-sex parochial schools that placed a pretty high emphasis on both grades and athletic competition. So they were really surrounded by it. So that really made a difference. All their peers were pretty much doing the same thing. They were working hard both in the classroom and on the field. So it made our life a lot easier as parents to reinforce that. But we were pretty strict. So if either one of our son or daughter was in a class, and we knew it was a real tough class, and they came home with they really did the best to their ability. I didn't worry so much about the actual grade as much as their ability and how hard they worked. But if assignments weren't sent in or they didn't do their homework, we wouldn't let them go to sports. We would pull them from games. We would pull them from practice. And the interesting thing is, you really only have to do it once, and then they know you're not playing. And you actually only have to do it for one kid, because the younger kids know that you will do it. There was time for both of them where they started to wander a little bit about, is this worth all the hard work? And we would ask their coaches to reinforce it, and we would also ask some of the older athletes that we knew, family friends or previous ball players in college that we knew, just to talk to them, just to say, this is the reality. This is what it takes to get into a school. And what I'm finding now that my kids are actually in college is what it takes to stay in school and to continue to play at a high level.
Let me ask you about the decision. Did the kids start out in single-sex private schools, parochial schools from the beginning, or how did you and your husband come to make that decision, and how much did the children have input into the school that they would end up graduating from?
So we moved to our town specifically because they had great public schools. I was a product. I did a couple of years of Catholic school early on, but I went to public school. My husband went to public school. We both went to public colleges. So we were pretty committed to public education. But right around 8th grade, my oldest son, we had a really good private Catholic school right near us, and he really initiated it. He wanted to go. He wanted a little bit of a change. He really wanted to push himself. And actually, my husband and I were very reluctant to send him there. We weren't sure it was a good decision, but he wanted to go. He did all the paperwork that was necessary. He made the contacts that were necessary, and we held our breath and gave it a try, and it turned out to be an amazing situation for him. I don't think everybody gets so lucky that he had such a great situation, but he really did. He did well academically. He did well athletically. He has a real great group of friends that he's still real close to, who are now they are their junior year of college. My son's in his second year of college because he did a year of Navy prep before he went to the Naval Academy. And all these kids are still doing great academically. Not everybody lasted in their sport, but they're good kids getting internships and, doing what they need to do academically. For our daughter, she started in public school. She didn't have any real interest in going to what would be the equivalent all-girls parochial school to my son's school. And at the end of her freshman year, we started to talk about it a little bit. What do you think? Was this a good experience? And the all-girls Catholic school that she was interested in they were state-ranked volleyball team. And had a really nice reputation academically. And I think she got to a point where she decided she really wanted to challenge herself as well. And together we made that decision. I would say my son it was really 100% his decision, and I would say with my daughter it was closer to 50-50. But she also saw the success that her brother had and thought that would be, it seemed like a good path to take.
So let's walk us through the experience of the oldest child being recruited. I know I directly participated in that process, but before I got involved, tell us about his experience and how it relates to how recruiting has become much more aggressive at a younger age, which can work to the disadvantage of many kids and almost derailed your child.
Yeah. So my son was both a football player and a lacrosse player, and he entered into high school hoping to be a football recruit by the time he was done with high school. We have a little bit of a unique situation in our family where my kids are particularly large. My son is now 6'7", about 270.
Oh, gosh.
He's a big boy. But a lot of kids who grow to that size, he developed late. And so he was kind of tall and skinny, all feet and hands for a real long time. And it took him, some people would argue, until just last year to really grow into his body and be able to have real good control over his body. So while he was able to play high-level football, lacrosse, he was a little awkward, actually. He wasn't that smooth on the field. But he was a big kid, and he had a tendency to be able to get the ball into the net. He's an attackman. So he was really thinking football for a long time, and he sustained a pretty significant football injury.
Kathy, let me pause you for 1 second. For those that don't know lacrosse, think of her son as a Magic Johnson. So Magic Johnson was a 6'8" point guard and just doing whatever he wanted. Her son essentially is like a point guard. He's at a skilled position, and he is oversized and extremely good because he is so big. So you were saying about his head injury in football. Go ahead.
Yeah, so he sustained a pretty significant, it was actually a neck injury in football, and it kept him out for almost a full year of football. And at that time, he really started to develop his lacrosse game. He needed to keep busy, so we went up to our local wall where the kids go and play lacrosse, and just kept, hitting the ball against the wall and shooting on his friends, and he was really developing a love for it. He always liked it, but it was his secondary sport. So by the time he was a junior, he was really interested in playing lacrosse at the college level. He was invited to a couple colleges because the school had a really good reputation for sports, and he was a top student. He did quite well in school. That got a couple invitations to their showcase days, and but he didn't do such a great job. He was still recovering from his injury, and again, he hadn't quite developed really good form on the field. He was still a little awkward, a little choppy, and we called it. He had a lot of moving parts that didn't quite go together. But he had a lot of determination, but there were no real bites.
You mentioned showcase days. Can you unpack that for parents who don't know what that means? You said he was invited to a couple of showcase days. What does that mean?
So that was specifically for the colleges. So showcases, there are also showcases that you would know better than I would, because he wasn't actually invited to a lot of those, where I think, independent lacrosse programs have what they call showcases, and they invite colleges. These are specifically for the colleges. So for an example, he went to Colgate for one, where Colgate would say, on these days we're going to have a lacrosse, probably showcase isn't the right word, but a recruiting day. That they would invite
prospective player day or something?
Like a player day where they would have a certain amount of openings, and you were invited for one of those openings, and you would have to respond that you'll go, because you're one of many. You're not necessarily special because you get one of these invitations. And there could be 50, 60 kids coming for that day, where they'll do a number of drills. They'll play some scrimmages against each other, so they get a little bit of a sense of what kind of player you are, if they feel like they're interested in you. Often you submit their grade point averages, their SAT scores, things like that, to see if they would be a good fit. So Jack, my son, went on probably 3 or 4 of those. Didn't really do that great by his own report, and didn't get any feedback, positive feedback. Usually, if they're not interested, you don't hear. If they are interested, you do hear.
Is it you pay a certain fee? Do you sign a waiver and you step on the field? Tell us about it.
Yeah, no, let's see. I'm trying to remember. I kind of feel like we did have to pay, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Mm-hmm. I don't remember exactly if we did. I kind of feel like we did, but I'm not 100% sure. Mm-hmm. So he went into the lacrosse season his junior year without any interest in lacrosse. At this point, he had really decided that lacrosse was the sport he wanted to play, and was a little frustrated because by junior year, a lot of lacrosse players are already recruited. And but he went into his junior year, had a phenomenal year. He was second round All-State, All-County. They won the county champs. They won the state champions in their division. They lost in the Tournament of Champions, which is the state race for all the different leagues that the schools are in. They lost at the last in the finals, and he was really getting a lot of press at that point. He had grown into his body a little bit more. He was the highest scorer on the team, one of the highest scorers in the state. And he was selected for another showcase, which was the Under Armour All-American Showcase. For that, I guess it was in May or June. And
this is his junior year, May or June?
Yeah, May or June of his junior year.
Okay.
And so he was selected to play in this tournament. And luckily, the selection process was from some local coaches who knew him and played against him. And it wasn't even his coach that he played for. And so he went to this particular tournament. And during this process, he was a club player also in the summer. But again, he never really settled into a particular club. He played with, I think, 2 different clubs. And he came very late to the club season, only once he was in high school. So we didn't have any real connections through his club teams. Mm-hmm. So he went to this Under Armour showcase. It was down in Maryland. I remember the power went out when we were down there. It was one of these real hot days. And he did really well during that outing. And then we had a particular incident where one of the big lacrosse coaches was watching my son playing. He was having a particularly good game. he really probably played the best he had ever played up until that point at that particular showcase. And this coach started screaming at the top of his lungs, "Who is this kid, and how come I don't know who he is?"
Mm.
And what happened is, by him literally yelling this to his assistant, it kind of caught the attention of a lot of other coaches in the area who were watching other games. And within 5-10 minutes, there had to be 30 or 40 coaches watching this game.
Wow.
Which was interesting. At that point, we got some phone calls real fast about interest in Jack, and but at that point, all these were all Division I programs. At this point, he was interested in playing Division I. We got a couple phone calls and said, your kid's got good grades. After we talked to him, there's a real good chance you could get into this school, but we don't have any spots left on the team, so there's no. You won't be specifically recruited. There is no scholarship money, but if you can get into this school, we will give you a preferred walk-on tryout.
Which it sounds to me a preferred walk-on tryout. It's like, okay, what the heck does that mean? And I think this is important because if a coach has recruited a class and given them all a scholarship, and then you come on as a walk-on, and you're better than the people that he gave money to, it doesn't make that coach, he or she, look very good. And I think parents need to understand that when somebody gets a preferred scholarship work-on opportunity. If you come on and look really good, don't think the coach is necessarily going to be very happy with you, because you may have just caused that coach to get in trouble with his athletic director.
Yes. But we did get a few of those phone calls that they said, you're basically, you're probably good enough to play with this team. We don't have any spots, but if you get into the school and come out for tryouts, we'll take a real hard look at you. And so that wasn't something my son was interested in. We weren't interested in parents. And then we did get a very serious phone call from Rick Sohl at Navy, who saw Jack play and was very interested, and that's when you came into the picture.
and what's interesting, folks, when you listen to this story, the reason that this happened is, first of all, Rick Sohl was just named the head coach of Naval Academy. Because it's an academy, you cannot recruit the same aggressive verbal commitments that other schools. That's one thing. Number two, Rick Sohl was a personal friend of mine. I played against him in college, played with him after college, so I had a relationship. And I put together an email and sent it out. And again, this is a strategy that may help some parents, that you have somebody who is connected to a network, who's got credibility. And I put together an email and said, and titled the subject, "Who Wants to Look Like a Genius?" and sent it out to some of the top lacrosse programs in the country and got a couple bites from some of them. But most of them could not do anything, because that class was already full. So it could be a really frustrating situation when you see a great player. And when you're talking about somebody who blooms late, you got to work on a lot of different ways to make this happen, and which is what this family has done, and it worked out. But it doesn't always work out like that for everybody, it sounds like.
And in fact, don't forget there was one step in between. So you and I talked, and you even said to me, as long as we've known each other, we've known each other a long time, grew up together, our parents knew each other, our parents were friends. You said, I want to help you out, but I have to do my own due diligence.
Yep.
And you didn't just take my word for it that my kid was a good lacrosse player. You asked around.
And I think that's another important piece, because it was that year the U.S. U19 U.S. national team was having its final practice in the area where I live, and I went to it. I was asked to come speak to the team, and one of the coaches, after I spoke to the team, he came up to me and we spoke, and came to find out he's from New Jersey, and I used that as an opportunity to basically do my vetting of Jack, and I said, "Do you know Jack Ray?" "Yeah." "Can he play?" The guy's eyes dilated. "Oh, can he play? He's unbelievable." And that's what I needed. And I think this is important for anybody who wants to help a child get into a college, whether it's academic or non-academic athletic. If you put your name on the line for somebody who is not hasn't passed muster, you haven't vetted, you could kill your credibility with helping somebody in the future. So that's an important part, that you're honest with the family and you're honest with the athlete about what you can and cannot do.
And then, you were great enough to do that. And then we got a phone call to, would you like to come down and spend some time with us at the Naval Academy? And again, it was even late. He already had a lot of his teammates that he was interested in. We had to make sure he had the right, grades in SAT and community participation and all that the Naval Academy is looking for. They don't care he's a great lacrosse player. He better have everything else also, or they're not going to let him in. And so my husband and I drove him down, and my son was a little tentative. Is this something that I can do? It's not something we thought about. I mean, we're not a military family in terms of having generations that served. I mean, my husband and his father served at a time where most of our dads served, but that's kind of where it stopped. So we went down and had a great experience. I mean, just had an amazing experience. We didn't talk much about, what he was thinking, and it was interesting because at this point he was still getting recruited for football, even though he had this injury. He was healing really nicely, and because of his size and because of the high school he went to, they were national champs for football.
Wow.
We were still getting phone calls about football because football is the one sport that happens much later, and that's strictly through high school coaches because there's no real club football. And got down to the Naval Academy, had a great time, and met Coach Soul, had a great, real good feeling about who he was. And, Fred, you and I had talked about what kind of guy he was, and if I thought that, he would be a good person to really have this kind of influence over my son for the next couple of years, because, coaches have a tremendous influence on our kids when they go to college. They might be their main adult contact the whole time they're there, because professors change and colleagues change, roommates change, but the coach generally remains the same, if you're lucky. And it was a great experience. We had fun, and then unbeknownst to us, my son decided on the spot that he was going to take the spot. And we were a little shocked, and thought we would have some more time to talk about it. But he felt like it was his only solid offer, and it's something for these kids. I think we forget, and coaches unfortunately forget too, that when they're communicating with the athletes, and I always asked my kids that when they communicated with the athletes to CC me on it on the email. One, to sort of show the coaches that, we're sort of serious about this potential relationship, but also to help my kids understand that just because a coach is saying they're interested, they're saying that to 10 kids, 15 kids, at least, for every position, and kids can really get their hopes up, and they think that when they hear that people are interested, that may mean more than what it could mean.
I also think it's a great way to hold the coach to accountability as well. That, look, I'm listening, I'm reading, and if you are on the up and up, there shouldn't be any problems. So I think that's wise. Let me ask you in transition, how did the experience with your oldest shape, help, and prepare you for the experience you just went through with the freshman you just dropped off?
It's different because, again, we're talking about a male athlete and a female athlete. And female athletes generally develop faster than male athletes do. So much happens physically when boys go through puberty, how strong, how fast, how high they can jump, all the things that they need to do can't really happen until they go through puberty. So puberty, we know, makes boys stronger and faster. Puberty for girls, it doesn't do that for them. It does not make them stronger. It does not make them faster. If anything, it makes them the exact opposite. They have to relearn a lot of their athletic skills with these new bodies that are shaped differently. The stress on the knees and the ankles and the hips that the girls experience, they don't have any of those problems until after puberty. So puberty is not a deciding factor in girls recruiting the same way it is with boys. So the girls are pretty much full grown by 8th or 9th grade. And like I said, my son is very big, and my daughter is similarly as big as well. So she's 6'2". She's a 6'2" volleyball player. She's been 6'2" since she was in ninth grade.
Unbelievable. Wow. I mean, I think I've never heard anybody unpack the difference of how puberty affects an athlete. This is really interesting to me, and I'm sure to many of the people who will listen to what you're having to say. That's profound. How a girl has to get used to a different body size, a different shape. That's really interesting.
And actually, I think that one of the interesting things about that is as we figured out that our kids were pretty decent at sports, especially in the middle school years, there's a real ramp up for kids to start to specialize and start to join clubs and start to do personal training and all kinds of things. And I remember when my daughter was in about 7th grade, she was starting to make a pretty good. She had a pretty decent growth spurt, and she had also switched from basketball to volleyball during this time. And when she was still playing basketball, some of the club coaches that she was playing for a club team, and they said, it looks like your daughter's pretty good at this. We'd like to really ramp up her training, maybe get her on another travel team. We're pretty close to New York City, and they have a lot of really good quality girls basketball in New York City. We can get her in some leagues in New York City. And because I remember, I'm not quite as tall as my daughter, but I remember 7th and 8th grade when I started growing, I could barely walk down the street without falling down because I was so uncoordinated. Had to wear braces on my knees all 4 years of high school because my growth was so rapid, and it took a long time for me to catch up. I said to the coach, not only is she not doing more, we're actually pulling her back and she's doing less.
Wow.
And we spent a good year still playing, and she started playing volleyball, so she wasn't playing as competitively, just kind of more for fun.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the kind of sport that she wants to play? Spent a lot of time just doing regular stuff, riding her bike, swimming, not really worrying about any of that kind of stuff in terms of extra training, because I really wanted her to let her body fill out a little bit, to stop growing, which took a little time because she got so tall. To just allow her body to grow into itself and not for her to be hurt because of overtraining. And for girls' sports especially, if you look at the soccer players, lacrosse players, volleyball players, the girls who get recruited are the last girls standing because so many girls by the time they're seniors in high school have blown out their ACL.
Wow.
So I think it's really careful when you have a young female athlete to be really mindful of training for no injury. Not for strength, but to prevent injury.
Can you give us some examples of things that you all made sure your daughter did in that respect?
Well, we certainly worked with a trainer. Later on, as we basically backed off of everything. We didn't have her do extra clinics, extra leagues. We let her be a kid.
And that sounds like that's counterintuitive to what the coaches want.
It's absolutely, and it's also counterintuitive to what is helpful to young male athletes.
Interesting.
Because getting the form right and lifting and strength training for the boys can be really helpful even at a young age. As long as they're not lifting, too many weights and things like that. But for girls, because their bodies are changing so much, so the girls are basically their hips start to widen, and that changes all the pressure on the knee and the ankle. And a lot of what I was talking to a trainer the other day about this, and so what happens is there's a lot of tightening in the hip flexors, and that throws off your alignment. So your knees off and your ankles are off. So what's really helpful for girls especially, and tough for boys too, but really for girls, yoga classes, stretching classes, dance classes. Those kinds of classes really help with the alignment, because if the alignment's okay, you don't have a tendency to do anything bad to your knees or ankles.
We'll be right back. Hey listeners, if you like this podcast, check out The Dinner Table with me, host Fred Opie. Listen to archived content and in-depth interviews with insiders and innovative people working with food on our website, www.fredopie.com. Now back to the show. Let me ask you, with your daughter, do you have an idea how many schools she had on her list? Did she start out as a sophomore or a junior with 10 schools, and how did she narrow it down, and when did you decide, or where did you decide to visit?
So she had a little bit more of what you would kind of like a traditional recruiting experience. She was a real good volleyball player. She started on her varsity team as a freshman. She's 6'2", so she was already standing out as a player to watch. She played in one of the really good club teams for New Jersey, and she had great coaches when she was there. So, right away, the way this club team is, we were going to tournaments where there were college coaches there all the time. And we developed a really close relationship with the director of the club program, who also became her coach her sophomore and junior year. He just happened to he takes the girls that year, that sophomore year, right when all the recruiting really starts, because he really knows his stuff and he knows a lot of the college coaches. So we started to talk to him about, he knew my daughter really well. He knew her personality. He knew her style of play. And and I felt really comfortable asking him, what do you think? Do you think she can play D1 volleyball, number one? That's the first question to ask. And that's the difference with lacrosse. Lacrosse only has about, 70 D1 programs. Volleyball, there's like 350.
Wow.
So you're talking about a much greater range. There's more money in volleyball for scholarships. We know for lacrosse, it's pretty limited. Lacrosse money. Volleyball, there's more. Because it's generally, volleyball is one of the fall sports they have going up against football to even out the girls' sports. I mean, there's more money in girls' sports than there are boys' sports. Just to balance out football teams, because there's so many players on the football team. They have to balance that money out. And he said, yeah, I think she could play D1 volleyball. I think she could definitely play D1 volleyball. And then because there's 350 teams, what are we talking, top 100? Bottom 100? There's a big difference, a real big difference in D1 volleyball because there's so many teams. And we really listened to him. We really listened to what he thought she was capable of doing. She also had pretty specific academic goals in mind. She is in an engineering program right now, and she knew that's what she wanted to do. She knew she wanted to be just a couple hours from home. She didn't want to go out west or too far down south. So when you start for her, it was really putting the pieces together, the puzzle. And she started to come up with some ideas for herself, what kind of school she was interested in, what kind of volleyball she wanted. And it was a real balance. I mean, she was recruited from some very, very high academic schools who had maybe a little less quality volleyball in terms of competitiveness. She was recruited from some schools that had really high competitive volleyball, but maybe didn't have an engineering program. That was a full scholarship that she didn't take.
Why do you think she decided not to take it?
Because it didn't have the academic majors. They didn't have engineering at the school. Okay. So she was really trying to start to play with that. Can I go to a top-notch academic school and still play D1 volleyball? She's a good student, but she's not a genius. She's like, there's no way I can do that. And we really talked to her about, especially, and I always worried about injury, even though she was pretty lucky. If volleyball doesn't work out, is this the school you want to be at?
Exactly.
And that was the same with my son, but he was really focused on what he wanted. She was a little more open to that because we started this discussion earlier, and we were starting the discussion with real interest. So we had a couple choices of a couple different schools. With my son, it was really one school. And it was going to be yes or no to that school. And then we went on the visit. So we probably had about 15 schools that we were interested in. We kind of cleared it with her club coach. For volleyball, it's all about club coaches. It's not about high school coaching, because high school volleyball is very different than college volleyball. And so he thought all of them were good choices in terms of volleyball. and we thought that they were good choices academically for her. And then we started to go on a couple different college tours. So I think we probably went to 5 or 6 interviews that were set up by the coaches. Some discussed scholarships, some where there was no scholarship money, so we had a big range. And the school that she ended up going to wasn't on the top of her list, and we just said, let's just check this out and see if this is a school you'd be interested in, kind of use it as practice. It was probably the 2nd or 3rd school we went to, and as soon as she stepped on the campus and met with the coach, she knew it was the right school for her.
Wow.
And one of the things that was very helpful to me, specifically for my daughter, was because she stayed with a club team for a number of years, her coaches really knew her, knew who she was as a player. And I would speak to the head of the program and said, well, what do you think about this school? And he goes, she will never get along with that coach.
Wow.
Or that coach will not like her style of play. Or that coach, he didn't feel like she would mesh. And he had a real sense of who she was as a player, how to coach her, and he knew enough of the college coaches to say that was a good fit, that was a good fit, and we trusted him. And I think that one of the most difficult things as a parent is, you kind of we all have a little bit of an inflated sense of who our kid is, because we think they're great. We should think they're great. They're our kids. But I can't judge what kind of volleyball player she is.
Catherine, let me ask you, I'm thinking about the parent out there who somebody says you should listen to this show and they hear us talking. Could the same thing have happened with your kids if you didn't have the financial means that you have now?
Well, that's an interesting call because because I think that in some ways we have 4 kids. Both my husband and I work. We don't have unlimited income, so we couldn't say yes to everything. So we were very careful about what we said yes to in current terms of showcases, club teams. So I think that your funding ability can limit you, or it can increase your possibilities. Do you need some financial flexibility to do this? I think so. Okay. I think it's really hard because it takes a lot. It takes a lot to sort of the making of a D1 athlete, so to speak. And so people will, we have friends who sort of know what we've been through, and they'll ask advice. Do you really need the training? Do you really need the showcases? And the unfortunate answer is yes. You do need a certain amount of it, but it's important to be judicious about how you spend your money. It's just I think it's the way things are. Outside of football, most recruiting and sports development comes through the club system. And the club system you pay for. Football is still the one sport that it's all done by high school coaches. Interesting. Very interesting. So that it's an unfortunate piece of this puzzle, to tell you the truth. And you're not going to get a financial payoff. I think that's important for parents to know, that all the money that you invest in your kid playing sports very rarely results in a full scholarship. Very rarely. And the other thing that's actually the one thing I do say when people say, well, what do you think is the best thing to do? I said, make sure they have good grades and good SAT scores. Yeah. Because I think that, like you were asking me a question before, like what if your kid's not really doing what they're supposed to be doing in the classroom? I actually think it's a really good indication of if your kid's equipped to play college level ball. What do you mean? Because anybody who plays college level ball has to get it all done. They got to get to class. They got to get they have to get passing grades. They have to be able to get to practice, and they have to be able to negotiate, some of the extracurricular activities that happen at the college level. And that is a tough thing for an 18-year-old kid to do. Do I stay home from a party that I really wanted to go to because I have work that has to get done and I got to be up at 7 o'clock to get to the gym for practice? So those kinds of skills just don't develop overnight. They start at a younger level. So if you have a kid who's getting their work done, doing what they need to do on the field, able to socialize with their friends and have a good time, but not get themselves in any trouble, you got the makings of it. But if you have a kid who's sort of not quite living up to all the expectations that you might have, 9 times out of 10, that kid's going to struggle when they get to the college level.
I want to end on this particular question that I think it'll be interesting to see. I have no idea how you're gonna answer, but who was your favorite athlete growing up?
Let's see, who was my favorite athlete growing up? I don't know. I like teams. I never
who's your favorite team?
Individual athletes. When we were growing up, we didn't have female athletes.
This is true.
We had a couple tennis players, but there were no Mia Hamms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There were no Brittany Griners. That none of those people. They existed, but they weren't in the public. So, like I guess most boys at that age. You knew me growing up. I was a big sports kid. I was watching, the Giants and the Jets and Dallas Cowboys and, following the Lakers and Chicago Bulls. And, as a young woman, I was following male athletes.
That's interesting. For me, when I think about the pinnacle of the female athlete when I was growing up, it would probably be Billie Jean King and Chris Evert.
Yeah.
They were, in my mind, they were this, and then probably track would have been FloJo and Jackie Joyner-Kersee. Those were just unbelievable athletes.
And that was a little later on.
Yeah, you're right. That's probably more my college.
That's more like when we were in college. But so we had the tennis players, but I was never a tennis kid. I was playing basketball and field hockey, and I didn't even know. I didn't even know that I could have used sports to go to college. And I was a pretty decent ball player back then. And I didn't even know that was, that I could try to leverage sports to go to college. And so I was still watching the boys.
Interesting.
And, and watching, college basketball and watching professional basketball. And, so I think that I didn't really have role models.
No, it's definitely a very different world. So the last three tips you would say. I'm a parent. I have let's say a ninth grader. I think that's an 8th or 9th grader. Seems to be a very gifted athlete. Let's say baseball. And I'm the parent. What would you say, Mom and Dad? These are things you need to do. Give us 3.
Develop a relationship with your kid's coach in the sense of whether it's a club team. Develop a relationship in the sense that you feel like you can talk to this coach to get a really clear understanding of who your kid is as an athlete. I know people don't like to hear sometimes, listen, your kid's a real solid D3 player. And parents are looking for D1. And don't forget D2. That's where the money is. Division 2. It's a smaller division, but there's often scholarship money available. Scholarship money isn't available at D3 for athletics. It can be for academics. Listen to the people who coach your kid. They're going to tell you who your kid is, and it's not always easy to hear that. But they have a really good sense of what it takes to go to the next level. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you can't neglect academics. The academics are really important. If you are a kid that a coach has to take a chance on, you better have those grades, because that gives a coach an indication of if you're a serious kid who can get all their work done. If you're just a gifted athlete and you're a phenomenal ball player, whatever sport you're playing, and you're getting recruited by 35 schools, your SAT scores don't matter quite as much. But those kids are few and far between. And I think the last piece is follow your kid's lead. You may have a kid who you really think could play D1 ball in college and maybe get into a better school or get a little money for their college education, but you can have all the athletic gifts in the world, but if you don't have that want, it's not going to happen. Coaches see it. They see gifted kids who maybe they don't quite have the desire, the fire that they talk about, the sort of these intangibles, and you can't make your kid have that, and you can't give that to your kid either. That's something that they have to develop on their own.
I think that's excellent advice, and I want to thank you very much for sharing from the heart your experience. I think it's going to go a long ways in keeping people from making mistakes, and also making the life of coaches at many different levels a whole lot easier, for sure.
Actually, there's one thing that I didn't add that I think is important, is that the bulk of the work in recruiting is going to be on you with the parent, not the coaches. The coaches really come in, or your family connections or whatever, they really come in at the end when you're closing the deal.
Interesting.
But a coach is not necessarily going to reach out to a peer at the college level unless you've already gotten in touch with that coach, sent them any information that coach had already asked for, showed real interest. They're just not going to do it because there's too many people asking for those kinds of connections.
Who was the college coach on either experience with your son or your daughter who impressed you the most, but your child decided not to go? Let's give that person some kudos. Who comes to mind?
The American volleyball coach. The staff at American, they are top 10 volleyball, and they were definitely interested in my daughter, and we went and talked to them. Again, this was not a school that was a great fit for her academically. They didn't have the major she was interested. She was also a little concerned about the high level of volleyball that they have there because they're so good. His staff was pretty amazing. They returned phone calls when they said they were going to. When we got there, they did everything they said they were going to do. They met us where they were supposed to. We got to see the campus. We got to see the facilities. We got to meet with the academic advisors that they had. They did a great job. Great school, and their volleyball program is top notch. So that would be the one place that I was really impressed. That wasn't a good fit for one of my kids, but the two places where they ended up, the Naval Academy and Lafayette College, I was unbelievably impressed by the coaching staff, the assistant coaches, the facilities, how on top of the combination of academics and athletics. I couldn't be happier with the two schools that both my kids chose.
And I think is a key word you use there that people need to keep in mind. It's the same thing in the job world. It's fit, and the fit's got to be right for your child, and the fit's got to be right for the coaches staff. I always tell people when I was a junior college player, the kid from my hometown who I wanted to be like and I looked after, and you'll know, was Clay Johnson. Anybody want to be Clay J?
Everybody.
And Clay went to the University of Maryland, and he was the man. As a freshman, this guy's running second midfield, which for those who don't know our sport, lacrosse, you're a starter. And he's playing in a national championship. So, I got my eye on University of Maryland probably when I was an eighth grader for no other reason than Clay Johnson. But guess what? It wasn't a good fit. When it came time for recruiting, I wasn't a good fit for them, and I recruited them more than they recruited us. So fit is so critical, and you have to listen to the coaching staff at the school where you think or your child thinks, I want to go there. Do they need your child, and is it a good fit for their program?
And so much of it is also position.
Yeah.
So if they have enough, if your kid's a goalie, and they already have 4 or 5 goalies, if it's a good academic fit, it's worth it's worth really pursuing. But if your kid's going to be the 5th or 6th goalie, knowing that a new goalie is going to get recruited, don't forget they recruit almost a full team every year. Is that the right fit? Is there room? Is there potentially room for you on that team? Because especially at Division I, and you know this better than me, it's a lot of work.
I'm thinking of the the quarterback who's now an announcer, who won Super Bowls with the Dallas Cowboys, Troy Aikman.
Mm-hmm.
Very few people know that Troy Aikman started his college career at University of Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And then he finished his college career at UCLA. So it is so much about fit. The other guy who plays for the Charlotte team, the quarterback, I can't think of my mind right now. But again, this guy was at 4 or 5 different colleges.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the right thing, folks, but if you think about the guy who went to Florida the same year Tim Tebow went there,
Right.
it's you may not play because you have some great athletes in front of you. So it can be sometimes a game of musical chairs. I certainly would not change schools. I wouldn't recommend this to anybody, change schools because you want to play. But what we're saying is, going into the door, be realistic about your child's ability and the people who are in front. Because many children, many athletes, and I went through this myself, you literally experience depression when you cannot play for the first time. When you're not the man or the woman for the first time in your athletic career, it can send you into depression. I know that's the experience I had when I transferred to junior college. So you really do need to think about the things that we're talking about.
And everybody's a superstar. Guess what? Every single person on your college team was the best kid on their team, in their town, maybe their state. Tom Brady. Tom Brady barely played in college.
That's right.
Right. So it's tough, and then you need that tenacity to really stick through when you have 5 a.m. lifts and you have, practice, and you're missing classes for games, and you got to make that work up, and you have to be able to negotiate with your college professors around that, and that takes a skill set that you don't always learn in athletics.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff is important.
Well, Kathy, I want to thank you for being on the show. I'm excited about hearing the feedback from people who listen to your experience, what you had to share. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Fred.
For more interviews and related content, go to www.fredopie.com. Ask questions on Facebook at facebook.com/The Fred Opie Show, and on Twitter at twitter.com/Fred Opie Show. For information about advertising on the show, please email us at fredopie@gmail.com. That is fredopie@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and be good.